Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Invisible Museum live on Facebook, brought to you by Royal Talents North America. My name is Jeff Olson, and I am the Art Education Director for Royal Talents North America. Today, we're going to be having another contest, and let me go over the rules of it real quickly before we get into the rest of the introduction. We would like you to post your favorite work of art by a female artist on your own social media feed, tag us at Royal Talents NA, and use the hashtag Invisible Museum. We'll announce the winner at the next show, and we'll be giving away a great prize. This is a bundle of our Rembrandt specialty paper assortment. So there's papers for oils, there's papers for watercolor, for pastel, and for mixed media. It's about a $250 value. So now, everybody, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our Invisible Museum guide. Her artwork is featured in prominent private and public collections across the globe, and she is the recipient of numerous awards and accolades. She is an art historian and educator, working for over a decade at the Getty Museum, and her scholarly activity is dedicated to uncovering new perspectives regarding the life and work of the old masters. She is the co-founder of the nonprofit Project Awe and the founder of the Z Academy, where she mentors students of all ages based on her unique experiences and the techniques of old masters for inspiration. Please join me in welcoming everybody, the incomparable Zhenya Gershman. Zhenya, how are you?
Hello, thank you so much for this lovely introduction, for having me back. Welcome back, everyone. I wanted to thank you again. We did it. We tripled the numbers. We had about 35,000 people watch the last episode. So
Fantastic.
We are so grateful to you. We're grateful to the Royal Talents North America advertising team. Everybody's just doing such an amazing job. We are thrilled, especially because these tours are free. So again, thanks, Royal Talents North America, for sponsoring this. And I wanted to say that today is so exciting. It was meant to actually coincide with the International Women's Day on March 8th, but then I decided that I need 2 months to prepare and more time, because these tours are so intense. And so if you put yourself back into March 8th mentality, celebrating women, today we're actually focusing, doesn't matter, should be every day anyway, right, Jeff?
Absolutely.
So if we go back to that mode, we are celebrating women artists, and this is really, really interesting because there's so many. There's unusually, we think that there's not that many female artists throughout art history, but there were. Often they didn't get a chance to become famous or sign their works of art, but as we do more and more research, we discover more and more fantastic female artists. And it's really, really hard to choose, but I focused on 2 that you're going to meet in detail, and primarily because their work is so incredible that it doesn't matter if they're a woman or a man. Their work is just absolutely astounding, breaks the gender boundaries, breaks everything, breaks the time period. But then on top of it, when you go back and think that they were women at the time where women could not make art their career as they did, it makes it even more amazing. So it's kind of like a double amazement. And I wanted to take a moment to dedicate this tour, whether doesn't matter what gender you are and what background you are. It doesn't have to be an artist, but with their example, with these 2 incredible women that we're about to explore, they make us feel that anything is possible. So if you have a passion for something and there is not a defined career path for it, you can make it just by watching this tour, just by watching these women and using them as an example. So I just wanted to dedicate to everyone who is watching now and who will watch this tour and say our dreams are definitely possible. So with that introduction, I'm going to start to share our PowerPoint. Let's see. Share. And start. So much to do today. I hope you buckle your seatbelts. I think we're going to be in for about an hour-and-a-half ride, so we could head over to San Diego from Los Angeles. All right. So I just wanted to start by saying that there's so much research. These are 2 protagonists today, and there's so much research in the last few years that's been done that it's really exciting, and I wanted to refer you right away to two great books. If you want to know more on Sophonisba's work, Michael Cole had published a couple of years ago, this fantastic volume that brings the scholarship to a new level. A lot of new information, a lot of great focus, beautifully written. And on our second character, Artemisia, there was actually an exhibition this year. It just closed in January, but because of COVID museum closures, so much of the programming was online. So you can enjoy multiple lectures and videos, and all of that lives on the National Gallery Museum website. So I highly encourage you to check this out, and also a beautiful catalog celebrating her work. So I wanted you to meet Sophonisba Anguissola, a beautiful young woman here. She's in her early 20s. And before I tell you anything about it, she tells you about it. She wants you to meet her. Look at how she's looking out of this portrait. Now, this is painted in about 1554, at the time where women were really not encouraged to make a direct eye contact with the person that they're addressing. The ideal was of modesty, of putting your eyes down, of averting your gaze, of allowing to be something that you looked at rather than someone who's observing. So here already you see how, I mean, she's enlarged her eyes. She's not just looking out, she's staring, and she's studying. She's not just showing herself, she's the artist. She's studying you. You are, in a way, a subject of this work of art, with this deep penetrating gaze. The other thing that we learn here, that she's incredibly modest. Take a look, there is no jewelry, nothing, not an elaborate hairdo, a really subdued outfit. She was from a minor nobility family, and she had the means to dress up, but she chooses to wear this kind of a modest clothing all the way up with a high collar. And the most important thing that we learn about her, drum roll please, is that she's literate. She holds in her hand a book. So we'll look a little bit closer here, and we see that it is signed with her name, Sophonisba Anguissola, and then it adds on the right, you can see on the right of her thumb, Virgo, Sepsim, Fecit, 1554. And it seems that it is not only written, but it's written in Latin, which shows a very high level of education. And she's not only literate to read, but she's literate to write. And when we start to unpack her signature, it becomes even more interesting. Virgo refers to the fact that she's a maiden, and the kind of a purity status of her as a female. Sepsum means literally herself, and fetchet means maid. So if we put it all together, we get basically a maiden or virgin made this painting herself. Or if we take the whole signature, Sophonisba Anguissola made herself here as a virgin in 1554. So what does this reminds you of? Basically, Immaculate Conception. This painting is born from a pure woman, and she herself given herself birth in this portrait. So a very interesting play on her signature. I'm not going to show you a detail of another work, but on a couple of occasions, she plays with it. At one point, she's actually covering with her thumb on the other side in Virgo, the letter O, which literally then spells, instead of virgin, verge, which is a man. It becomes, from a woman, she becomes a man or a person. And sometimes she spells sipsum instead of with an A, with a U, which would also make it a male verb, Latin verb, playing with her gender role. So she is, remember, she's one of the only women, the only one who is to become really famous in her time, in 1500s, in the time of the great Michelangelo, who is painting in the male world. So she's going to kind of play with her identity as a female artist. Am I a female artist? Am I a male artist? Am I just an artist? Or am I this immaculate conception, this gift that is going to give birth to my work? So she's definitely thinking about her identity. Now, who gave birth to Sophonisba is this wonderful man. I just adore Amilcare, her father. He sits in the middle of this painting with his son and another daughter to his side. And I adore this man because he was, again, from nobility, and it wasn't common to educate the the female children on the same level as their male child. Now, he had lots of daughters, five. I believe she had five siblings, five sisters. So she's the sixth of the sisters, and only one younger male son, a son that he has that is born a little bit later. She's she's the oldest of the sisters. And this man, her father, decides to educate all of his children, all of his daughters, on the same level as his son would. So they're all literate. They all know how to read and write. They all read classical literature. And then he makes an unprecedented decision. Two of his daughters, Sophonisba and Elena, get sent at age 13 or 14, very early on, to a artist, a male artist, not a female artist. Of course, there's no female artist with a practicing workshop at the time, but still, it's mind-blowing because he's sending his two young daughters, his teenagers, to a male workshop, not just to learn with this male artist, and his name was Campo. Not only just to learn, but to live in his household, because that is the tradition. When you learning, it's like a boarding school. You go to the workshop and you live there, you eat there, you sleep there, and you learn the trade for a few years. So this was really, really unprecedented. So we cannot go back in time, unfortunately, and say, Amilcare, what made you decide? And we also, I would love to ask the artist himself, with which she went to study, how did he decide to accept these two young women? Because that was exceptional too. Most male artists would have turned it down. They would have said, this is not appropriate. We cannot teach these women. The only way that the women could get an artistic education was when they were born to a father who was an artist or a brother who was an artist, and that way they could be assistants, but they would never go and learn on equal terms. So I hope already I'm setting up the story, which is you raise your brows and say, this is incredible. What an opportunity. So I wanted to show you Elena Anguisola. Elena was the other sister that went with Sophonisba to study. And she did not become an artist. She chose the path of becoming a nun and dedicating her life to God. So it's very interesting that Sophonisba raises to the occasion and says, I'm going to take this untrodden path. And Elena chooses the path of religion. So just again shows you against the odds that Sophonisba pursues this. And I wanted to show you the face of Amilcare a little bit closer. I mean, just look at the softness. This is not a strict man. You could tell, right? He's loving, he's witty, he's educated. He's almost bursting into laughter. He's about to burst into laughter or say something sarcastic, but with such a soft, would you agree, Jeff, that he's really kind of soft personality?
Oh, absolutely. The way he's looking at us, and I'm imagining this is him looking at his daughter who's painting the painting, right? There's such
Yes.
admiration and pride in his face as well.
Yes, and this is, she's born in Cremona, in an Italian city, where women and daughters serve a kind of a minor role and have to know their place, and the man is the ruler of the house. And there's this very contemporary. I have a wonderful father. I'm not sure if he's watching today because he has a gastroenterology procedure scheduled to perform. He's a very famous doctor, but he will certainly be watching later. And I recognize that pride, that look, right, that warmth. And I know, Jeff, that you are an incredible father, so I'm sure that speaks to you
Oh,
as well. So There was a great art historian who most of you probably will recognize his name. His name was Giorgio Vasari, and he's considered basically the father of art history. He wrote a very famous book, Lives, in which he described the artists that he knew, and Michelangelo is in it, and Pontormo is in it, and sometimes he even talked about the artists who he didn't know. But in this case, it's incredible because he includes Sophonisba, Anguissola, in his book, right? He includes her on the level of these great men. And he describes this very painting that's in front of your eyes. And he says, in another picture may be seen, portrayed by the same Sophonisba, because he talks about her multiple occasions, her father, Signor Amilcare, who has on one side one of his daughters, her sister called Minerva, who was distinguished in painting and in letters, and on the other side, Asdrubale, their brother, the son of the same man. And these also are executed so well that they appear to be breathing and absolutely alive. So Vasari was cranky at times and he critiqued the artist and he had a lot to say when he didn't like something. So this is a huge praise, as you know, that they're breathing and absolutely alive in this painting. Now, I wanted to show you how Sophonisba returns the favor back to her father. She basically celebrates him every time she paints because when she signs Sophonisba Virgo, it doesn't just mean virgin or maiden. That refers that she's living with her father in her father's home or referring back to her family. So that's one way to address him. But in this tiny little miniature, take a look at the size of this. It's smaller than what you see on your screen, 3 by 2 inches. At this incredible work. It's now housed at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, that is famous for their miniature portraits collection. Have you seen their collection, Jeff?
I have. It's wonderful.
You know that room, right? That amazing
Mhm.
room. We should all travel there, or at least please go visit when you can, guys.
Wonderful.
Uh, amazing room of portraits. So they're jewel-like, but they're just as beautiful as large-scale portraits. But what's so interesting, she holds this medallion. Now, this is a self-portrait, and I should say that Sophonisba decided that she wanted to focus on female subject and the subject of the family and the subject of female friendship and the intimacy. You think about Marie Cassatt in 19th century. This is 16th century. She's the first woman to do this. And she focuses, because women are her subject, she focuses on herself because she's her first model, right? And she paints more self-portraits than Albrecht Dürer, and we're in the same time period, right? And she will paint almost more self-portraits than Rembrandt in the subsequent century. So really interesting how she champions the genre. I mean, really, she is the one who made self-portrait the big deal. And so in this particular tiny little miniature self-portrait, she holds the medallion, and the medallion attracts our attention. First of all, of course, she signs it. So around the rim of the medallion, we find by the maiden, Sophonisba Anguissola, depicted from a mirror. So she's telling you, I'm using kind of cutting edge tools. A large mirror is not easy to come by in 1500s, and it's her own hand. So she studied herself through reflection, and here she is by her own hand, and she's painted this in Cremona. So that's around the rim. But do you notice, Jeff, that there's these fabulous entwined initials in the middle?
Yeah, I was looking at that. I was wondering what that was.
So this is actually basically a hidden name. And this type of hidden name she would have seen this type of trick from a very popular text. This was a text on teaching women how to sew, embroider, and draw. And in this case, you can see that this is the ciphered name of Christ. And on the right, if you look at the example, if you look very carefully, you'll find 3 initials, I, and then there's H, and there's S. Look, they're hidden within there. So you meant to figure this out, and as you figure it out, you have a mystery of Christ, and of the intangible, the spiritual, and the physical perform in front of your eyes, right? It's something that's invisible. Talk about invisible museum tours. Invisible forming visible in your consciousness. So here on the left, she takes the same idea, but she hides the initials. I wonder if you could see A, M, L, C, another A, R, and E, which spells the name of her father. So instead of God or Christ, who is the creator of Sophonisba, is her dad, who she loves, and she lovingly holds this pendant. I found this so touching and so telling of their relationship.
Wonderful.
And of course, we have to look at her mother and talk about embroidery. Women mostly were considered that they should master, that it was really great for them to master the art of embroidery. But Sophonisba does not master it with real thread. She masters it with her paint. So take a look at how she paints her mother's dress. Every thread in this dress, it is mind-boggling. If you're a painter out there, you know how difficult this illusion is. Right, Jeff?
Mm-hmm.
And I was afraid that if I show this close-up, in fact, I wanted to show you the close-up of the dress of her mother, just to show you exactly this point. But when I blew it up, I noticed this very strange creature. And then I got very scared that somebody out there, I wonder if already there's some questions coming up. Jeff, feel free to interrupt me if you see something juicy. But I was afraid that somebody will say, what is her mother holding? And I went to every website and nobody mentioned this creature, but it really captured my attention. And then I have to say that my mother has incredible best friend, a brilliant artist. Her name is Marina Levicova, amazing animator and writer. And she's one of the greatest experts in animals. And I said, please text this image to your friend. And she was able to identify it. Because she identified it, I put it in Google search, and this is what I found. A little tangent, but this is fun.
Perfect.
It's a marten. And a marten is this type of animal. And you see here one from the Walters Art Museum collection. And this marten dates to the same date as when this painting is painted. And it wears this golden helmet on its head, right? And it's so curious. So what they believed, what the Walters Art Museum explains, is that they believed that marten was a great talisman for fertility, and that women would attach it to the belts and wear it on around their bellies to increase their fertility. And there was a medieval belief that marten can conceive through its mouth or its ear, hence make it a pure animal, right, that knows no sin. And so that even elevated it in the eyes of the faithful. And so here you see it's decorated in this strange garb, and in almost an exact creature attached to her mother's belt. I looked it up, and so it makes total sense. This is before some of her children are born, some of the sisters of Sophonisba, and so it's very interesting that she depicts her mother either trying to get pregnant or in the middle of her pregnancy, right?
Very.
A little tangent, but I thought it was worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating.
Okay, so talking about Immaculate Conceptions and Mary, we keep circling back to this idea. This is absolutely an astounding portrait. And what I have to tell you about this is from 1556. It is believed, Michael Cole says in his volume on Sophonisba, that she invented a self-portrait of an artist with their tools, that she's the first one to paint that.
Mm.
So to me, that's really, really incredible. And what's really amazing is the way, what tools she's using, right? Can you recognize what she has here, Jeff?
Well, it looks like an all stick
Yes.
that she's using to steady her hand, paintbrush, palette. That's what I can see in the small image.
You're completely correct. And what she's trying to do is to transform their meaning. So if you look at the mole stick and you look at her brush, she has formed a shape. She has formed a cross. So that's already referring to Christ, whom she's painting in the painting. And then furthermore, as we get a little bit closer, she touches his hand. So she's the creator of Christ, just like Mary would be created. She's painting. Her hand through her brush touches the divine hand. And then we see something so interesting. Mary almost looks like Sophonisba, right? Or one of her sisters. Very familiar face. And can you tell what Mary is actually saying or doing to Christ?
No, no. I mean, maybe giving him a kiss. There's some type of affection.
Yes. And while that affection, she puts her index finger between him and her and puts it on his mouth and shushes him. This is a symbol of secrecy, right? Shh, there's a secret here, right? You have a special mission that don't tell everybody, just, there's something special about you. So there's a kind of a moment, a friendship, if you will, between the women in the painting, separated by eternity and the Bible, right? But the women share the secrets of Anisba and Mary are in this conspiracy or in this know-how, the women's circle, through the brush, through this incredible round motion within this painting. Isn't that amazing?
It is a wonderful narrative, huh?
And we keep going. We see here this woman who you'd think this would be a self-portrait. And here you see it says self-portrait. And you even see the same last name. But the artist is different. This is not Sophonisba. This is Lucia, right? So this is her youngest sister, and she taught all of her sisters how to paint. So there's an amazing generosity in Sophonisba. She's not just wanting to become a great artist, but she's sharing her knowledge. And throughout her career, we'll discover that she shared it not just with women, but with men, and not just with women who are younger, but with women who are older. And she was not just a painter, she was also an artist, a teacher from a capital T. And I think the generosity of heart is really shown not just through her work, but a great teacher passing that knowledge, wanting more women become artists, right? To me, is incredibly touching. And talking about her sisters, this is one of the most amazing paintings from Renaissance to me, from 1555. And it's completely occupied by women, but they're not doing a female task, right? What are they doing? They're playing chess. This is a men's world. It's a battlefield. It's a male game, training boys how to strategize and expand their intellect. And here we have these young girls engaged in this activity. Now, interestingly, there is a metaphor here that's very powerful. And by the way, what a beautiful painting. Really, think about it. This is during Titian's time. And you could say, if you put them side to side, Sophonisba will not Titian get away with anything. She paints just as beautiful. And what's really interesting here, that it refers to the woman's world. But how? How does this painting of a male game refers to the woman's world? Well, if you notice the older sister on the left, she's holding one of the pieces. Do you want to take a guess what it might be?
I'm going to say the rook.
Why would you say that?
Well, if we're talking about embracing masculinity, the rook to me seems to be a masculine, but maybe it's the bishop. I'm not sure.
Let's ask our viewers. What do you guys think? If I wonder if we have already many
Seems to be
comments.
hidden. I can't see it in this image anyway.
Just a guess from our viewers. What piece might this girl be holding? And your guess is as good as Jeff's, so please give it a try.
Well, we have somebody guessing the queen.
And they're right. So here, if we close
and that hand there. There we go. I'm
Yes.
looking at the one on the board.
Oh yeah, I cheated you, right? You thought of more.
My fault. This shows where you're kind of being led in the painting, though. I
I
totally
know
was
she's
focused
kind of
on the
hiding it.
hand on the board. Yeah.
I think she wants you to go through that guessing game. I think she wants you to say maybe the rook or the bishop and then find the queen, right? So
Okay.
very interesting. Why the queen? Now, my husband loves playing chess. Any of you out there who
Oh, I
love playing
think I
chess?
see what's going on. She just took that queen, didn't she?
Well, it's very interesting to think about what the queen itself represents.
Hmm.
The queen there is a very important rule in the chess which called pawn promotion. That means that the smallest little piece, an insignificant pawn, if led through the board cleverly, can turn and be promoted by reaching the other side, the status of the queen. So that's giving a woman a kind of a role model that even if you're born as a pawn, if you make smart decisions through your life, you can become at the level of the queen. Now, another amazing thing, you could see that Sophonisba signs her very long signature at the side of the board. Of course, this is an imaginary chessboard, and no board would have this long signature. Can you see it at the bottom where the other hand is? It's right at the edge, a little blurry here, but
And now that you pointed out, yeah.
so that literally says, by the maiden, Sophonisba Anguissola, daughter of Amilcare, if here really identifying with her father, painted from true effigies of three of her sisters and of her maidservant in 1555. Uh, but interestingly, so we remember maiden Virgo. In Italian, the queen was referred to as Virgo, the maiden. So again, it's almost like by holding the queen, her signature is within it. She identifies with this, if you will, with this chess piece.
Hmm.
All right. And she did indeed painted portraits of queens and nobility and incredible clientele. And here's something that really blew my mind. This is portrait of Eleonora de Medici, a very high-ranking woman. So in order to attract such a visitor to your studio, you have to be able to talk their language. You have to be able to entertain them. It's very boring for her to stand there. So imagine to paint this elaborate, incredible portrait. And at the same time, as a painter, you have to upkeep the court conversation. You have to know about the latest play. You have to quote poetry. You have to gossip. You have to make her feel that she is not bored and at home. So, Jeff, I was feeling how sometimes we complain about, or at least I, how hard painting is. I never, when I make a portrait, think about entertaining that person on the level of the Medici court, right? So
Right.
this kind of what was said, oh my goodness, this is incredible. The level of education, poise, elegance that has to be within Sophonisba in order to paint that person. So one is reflected in the other in a way. And here you compare this portrait. I flash back and forth. Look at this woman and then look at that woman. This is Sophonisba's sister, Minerva. And look at how she paints her. She paints her as nobility. There's no difference between the Medici sitter and her sister Minerva. At some point, this portrait was thought to be a self portrait. There's a lot of resemblance between the sisters, sometimes hard to tell. But I want to attract once again your attention to the detail Sophonisba pays attention in her portraits. And if you look at this incredible medallion, you see that incredible golden medallion with a pearl hanging from the chest of Minerva. If we go closer, not long ago it was identified as the subject of Minerva, the goddess of war. Do you see her in the shield with a spear standing proud?
I
So
do.
within the medallion, right, there's her helmet and her spear, and she stands in her toga and holding a shield, right? So this is a way to say, a tongue in cheek, this is my sister Minerva, right? This is how she includes a kind of a little symbol, a hint, and no detail is missed by Sophonisba. Not sure if Minerva would be wearing this. It could be her invention. It could be Sophonisba's invention to include in this work of art. Any comments, questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Now, was it true? I had read that she was actually a member of the Spanish court as a lady in waiting.
Yes, and we are about to arrive to Spain in
Perfect.
about 2 slides. So that was perfect
Perfect. I'll
timing.
hold my comments till then.
Great. So this portrait is of basically unknown priest. And the reason that I show it to you, because of the quality of the work. I didn't want to just tell you stories. I wanted to convince you how incredible these two artists are. And by closing in on the details, just as incredible. Again, we talked about Titian, the vellatura, the layers of breathing skin, the glazes, the penetrating gaze. This man is alive, staring at us out of the Zoom meeting through Facebook to your home via Sophonisba. So I don't know, Jeff, if I've convinced you, but I'm trying to sell it to everyone who's watching right now.
It is an amazing portrait.
Look at that skin. It's
Yes,
not
it is.
it's not photographic, it's breathing, it's not solid, right? Really incredible.
The
And once
softness
again,
of the edges is really, really beautiful.
you
And the
know, Jeff, that
patchwork.
was such an astute comment because the softness is what she was known for. And that's how, when a lot of her work incorrectly was attributed to male artists, later on, curators and conservators who compare it now, they can separate their work, and their work is always crisper to that of Sophonisba, who's much softer. That is one of her trademarks. Very impressed, as usual, by your observation. So this is another quote by Vasari. So not once does he mention her. And she says, Anguissola has shown greater application and better grace than any other woman of our age in her endeavors at drawing. And that to him is such a huge respect, because drawing is kind of cerebral work. It's even higher than painting. It's a disegno, the design. She has thus succeeded not only in drawing, coloring, and painting from nature and copying excellently from others, but by herself has created rare and very beautiful paintings. And I just wanted to use Vasari's words because it's really remarkable that she's appreciated in her own time by such a great historian who's, again, writing about Michelangelo. And here we get to Spain. So just 2 slides away. You were about 30 seconds away from Spain. On the left, mid Philip II. And this is the same Philip II that we talked about last time when we were talking about Titian's series of poesy, of all of this incredible series with naked women, right? The nudes. If you haven't seen that episode, I highly recommend it. It's really interesting exploring the nude in art. And Philip II was a champion of this incredible series by Titian. Philip II did love women. On the right is his third wife. And he was close to his 30s when he married um, um, Queen Elizabeth of Spain. And she was just turning 14, very young girl. And she arrives at court. And one of the first decisions he makes is to hire Sophonisba Anguissola to come as a lady in waiting to assist to the future queen and the Queen Elizabeth. Uh, but why? This is the second mystery, the second question, maybe the third. The first question was, why did Sophonisba's father decide to educate her and send her to male artist workshop like nobody else has ever done before for a woman? Two, why did that Campi, her teacher, accept her when no other male artist would have? And three, why did Philip II bring in Sophonisba, second drum roll, to teach painting to his wife at Queen at court? Un- it's unbelievable. So Sophonisba is so famous that Philip II knows about her and he wants his wife to paint like Sophonisba does. Now she's a role model not just to other girls, a role model to Virgo, as we see in the Queen in chess. And hence the promotion, the pawn promotion rule. Now Sophonisba as at the Spanish court. She leaves her family, she leaves her birthplace of Cremona and travels to Spain by boat. And just imagine how hard that was to her. She's a young woman in the height of her career, and she's leaving everything behind. She will not see her father ever again. And she travels and she stayed at Elizabeth's side. And she teaches her painting, and it is known, it is said that at times Elizabeth got so carried away in painting that she was criticized because she didn't want to do other things because she enjoyed so much the art of painting. But to be a lady in waiting for the queen, you have to up your game. You have to learn how to dress at the court, and my favorite part, how to dance at the court. And what is said, the contemporary documents say that Sophonisba embraced the art of of courtier, or a noblewoman, so much of the Spanish court that she became famous for one of the best, if not the best, dancers. So I just, I love. Some of you may know, I might have mentioned that my hobby is tango. So just, as an artist who's coming to this foreign country, leaving her family behind, and she has to learn how to dance this perfect dance at the court, and she becomes the best at everything. Some of my tango friends who are watching, don't you love her? So here, just wanted, this portrait is a little bit damaged, but still it's so beautiful in its fragility. I decided to include it. And again, the warmth. Sophonisba did not have children of her own, and I feel that being an older woman, she than Elizabeth, that she almost felt like of her as a child. And Elizabeth died very young, and after her death, Sophonisba is about, I think she's about 14 years at the Spanish court. After Elizabeth dies, Sophonisba was said that she was crushed and wanted to die herself. And she actually stays 5 more years. Why does she stay? Because she feels obliged to help the children of the queen, and she teaches them how to paint, and stays with the children. And eventually it's time for her to go. And Philip II promises to deliver a great marriage because she's of such high status at this point. Now, I have to mention, Sophonisba was at the court. She was not a court painter. She was given a salary, but she continued to paint throughout her stay. She found time and she made magnificent paintings. But that makes it harder to identify because those portraits were not commissioned by the court. And a lot of times they weren't signed because they were local commissions at the court, right? But not by the king, not as an official male painter would have had the position. But she continues to make fabulous paintings. So finally, Philip promises to marry her, and her request is one. And here I show you the portrait of Elizabeth, but I think we can almost see Sophonisba through this smile and through this femininity. Sophonisba asks one request. This man has to be Italian, and an Italian man is delivered to her, really of great nobility, and she's married to him. I'm not even going to mention his name because it was kind of insignificant marriage for about 5 years. And she returns to Italy with him, but he travels on a business trip. And I tell you this story because it's really remarkable, and it will change you how you think about the personality of Sophonisba. Her husband travels by boat and is attacked by pirates, and he's escaping by swimming to shore, and he dies. So Sophonisba is distraught and decides after that, when she finds out that he's dead, to return to her family home in Cremona. And she sets foot on a sailboat and she goes back to Cremona, but on the way, something happens. And the archbishop receives a letter from the boat that she says that she has met a man. It was a ship captain, and she plans to marry him. And Archbishop writes back to her, begging her, saying that this is not a good idea. How could she marry someone so below her, a ship captain, some kind of almost pirate status, right? And stoop so low that she worked for the king. She has amazing family. She should not do this. And here comes my favorite part. She responds, marriages are first made in heaven and then on earth. I'm sorry, I'm already married because this was already planned. There was a divine plan. The man that she marries, Orazio Lomellino, is 10 years younger than her. I think she's in her 40s at this point, and has a son who she raises like her own. So a really courageous woman. Like, gives you a glimpse into her personality, right? From the court on the boat, madly falls in love with this sailor, and says to basically to the church, marriages are made in heaven. I'm not going to listen to anyone. No one is going to stop me. What do you think about that?
Romantic.
It just gives you kind of a spin, that she's a woman's woman. She's not, she retains her femininity, and yet she knows how to be as strong as a man. And we'll return to this idea when we come to Artemisia. Very quickly, returning back to the court before she is married, I wanted to share this boy with you. I discovered him almost, he wasn't part of this tour, but I couldn't help not put him in here. He was recently reattributed to Sofonisba, and this portrait is in the Museum of San Diego, very close by. So anybody who lives in Los Angeles can travel and see it. The curators, I think, one of the curators of San Diego mentioned that they belovedly call him the frog boy. And what I wanted to attract your attention to is how it's painted, this incredible dark background, this heroic stance of this tiny little boy, the luscious color. And what painter comes to mind who paints at the court in 17th century at the Spanish court and glorifies everybody? Diego Velazquez. Now, Diego Velazquez is in the century after Sofonisba. It's mind-blowing. Use this expression alone a lot today, to think that she's almost 100 years before him and paints just as good of a. Velazquez is considered the painter's painter, one of the best painters who ever lived. Well, here's Sophonisba. Eat your heart out, Velazquez. And speaking of male and female artists, this is perhaps the most interesting painting in her career, or maybe even one of the most amazing portraits in the history of art. And I hope I'll convince you why. Have you seen this one before, Jeff?
Just recently.
Okay, so this is a portrait of her teacher, Bernardo Campi. So on the left, you see her teacher who taught her everything she knows. And he's painting what? He's painting a portrait of Sophonisba, right? So everything is good, except for this is painted by Sophonisba. So it's a self-portrait through her teacher painting her. So strange. You have to take a moment to think about it. She's painting this painting, but she's also the painting in this painting. And then we look at the tools of the trade again, and they're the same as we've seen before. We see the mole stick, right? We saw it in her self-portrait painting Madonna and Child. And we see a tiny little brush that Campi is holding to do the intricate details in the work of art. But I want you to look closely. And I wonder if our viewers can start typing away and share with us something really odd and something very peculiar and something very interesting that you start noticing in the relationship between the subject, who's Sophonisba, and the creator, who's the artist. And I'm going to take a moment to see if you guys can share this with us. And meanwhile, Jeff, if you have any questions or comments, ideas.
Well, outside of the curiosity of this painting, I did think it was interesting that as a member of the Spanish court and her status and the nobility, that she wasn't able to take the title of court painter because it was thought of as be below her class or status. I thought that was very intriguing, and that almost being a lady in waiting was a way to get around that for Philip. And
that's right. And it just shows Philip as an extraordinary man and supporter of the arts. We know that he's supporting Titian, of course, but to support a woman this way, right? So there's three incredible men behind her. Okay, anybody's commenting, guessing?
well, we're getting some comments here, and something that I think is very interesting too. It looks like an additional hand or arm that's in the painting there.
Yes, so there, Sophonisba has three arms. And if we look at one of the arm, there's one that's holding the glove, is pointing down. What's the other one doing?
I can't quite make it out in the image here. It's holding on to something.
She's supporting the hand of her teacher,
Oh, I see. I see.
showing him how to paint.
She's
She says like
guiding
this,
him. She's guiding.
steady your hand, dude. She's really showing him she is the one. The subject, the woman as the subject, is guiding the man who taught her. She has become superior. She is actually larger than life. She's larger in scale in this painting, right? And in this time period, we know that her teacher wrote to her to the Spanish court, and he begged her. He said, I know of your self-portraits. They're so famous. Could you please send me one so I could have it in my collection? And she writes, with all due respect, I won't be able to send you one. She's too busy and she's too overwhelmed. But it's amazing how much she outgrew her teacher, right? And this strange painting. So I wanted to show you a little bit of a history here. Somebody looked at it and thought that it didn't look like Sophonisba enough, and they painted her in the black. Remember the black clothing and the white color? They painted over the red fancy clothing of the court where she is when she paints this to more of a self-portrait that everyone would have known her by. Probably somebody down the line after her death wanted to sell this painting, thought this would sell better. And at the same time, they thought it was inappropriate that she would guide her teacher's hand, and they painted out in this version, there is no hand, that third hand, right? That odd hand. Then the restorers discovered it not long ago. Her original beautiful clothing and jewelry was returned, uncovered, that was overpainted, and the third hand was returned. But then they felt really uncomfortable about it. And nowadays, it's her in her original clothing with her jewelry, but the supporting hand is actually taken away again. So it has lived through all these interpretations. But I love how we're still uncomfortable with what the artist sent the message, right? The message of her guiding the male hand. And that has been taken away. You will not see it if you travel to watch this painting in life. I wanted to share this little anecdote with you. Now, here we come to a very important part. First of all, as you could see, the subject of this drawing, and we know Vasari, how highly he spoke about the ability of Sophonisba to draw. Here we see something very strange. I wonder if you notice what's bizarre about this subject. Anybody in the audience or Jeff?
Well, the expressions are very intriguing. They're to me,
Yes.
especially in the context of that period. This smile, this kind of open casualness, and it's almost a mocking of the elderly.
There is this discomfort here. You again, Jeff. My head is off already because it's constantly off to you. The smile and the age is the subject of this work. And the young girl who very much looks like Sophonisba, one of her sisters, is teaching an older woman to do what? To read. She's guiding her finger. The older woman is illiterate. The young child is teaching a grandma to read. And this is really interesting because given the fact that Sophonisba and her sisters were educated, but one of the only women who were literate in their circles, it would make sense that Sophonisba as a teacher wanted to extend, remember we talked about her generosity, not only to future generations, but to all the generations behind her, extend the knowledge back and forth. This idea of course, it's a tongue-in-cheek. It's almost uncomfortable that the young girl should teach a grammar. And so here is the subject of that laughing, a smile, but it's not that of mocking, I would say, that of irony, right? Of irony of the younger teaching the old. And this was sent to Michelangelo. So Sophonisba's father, being a nobleman and having great connections, had great correspondence on her behalf, sent her artworks out, and he sent a letter to Michelangelo showing this drawing, and Michelangelo looked at it, and we know his response because his student talks about it. And Michelangelo's student says, Michelangelo, having seen a drawing by her hand of a laughing girl, said that he would have liked to see a weeping boy. So here Michelangelo is a bit competitive. He says, that's no big deal to do a laughing subject matter. How about a weeping boy? This much more difficult thing. And after he wrote her this, she sent him this drawing, which was a portrait of her brother, whom she studiously made to cry. I send it to you with this one, that of Michelangelo. So what does it mean? Michelangelo's student sends a letter to the Duke of Cosimo, a great man for patron. This is a letter by Tommaso di Cavalieri. He sends both drawings. So after Michelangelo challenged Sophonisba, she responds with this and says, no problem. You want a boy cry? Here's a boy cry. And he sends two of these drawings alongside Michelangelo to compare to the Duke, right, the Medici, to compare and show that she's just as good, if not better, than Michelangelo. So a wonderful story of how Sophonisba takes on the great master and maybe challenge him back, right? And here you see her brother, who is he's put the hand into the basket with crayfish, and the crayfish bit him and he's crying. And so many of the critics said, oh, Sophonisba tortured her little brother, she made him cry so she could get this great expression. But of course it's a playful image. He didn't even have to, right, experience this for her to even imagine having a little boy, a little brother growing up. You could see him crying often. And I come to the point that's really interesting, and we're going to switch to our other artist in the latter part of the tour. But in her old age, Sophonisba lived to her middle 90s, really incredible. She was by this time living in Palermo. And she outlives her century. She lives so long. She's living in 1600s now, a totally different century, in the almost Baroque time. And who goes to visit her? Who travels to see her? Anthony van Dyke, another new hero of 17th century, right? New artist. It's like if you imagine if Manet could go travel and meet Turner, right? It's just this, they're separated in time. And to Van Dyke, she's a hero. And he paints, this is a portrait of Van Dyke, of Sophonisba, when she's in her late age. And look at this incredible woman. Now I wanted to show you next to it. This is a self-portrait, roughly about of the same time, a little bit earlier. This is a self-portrait of Sophonisba. So she continued making her self-portraits all the way through until she actually, in the very late age, she lost her eyesight. But we could see how, I always love to see how the woman sees herself and how the male gaze, and to compare both incredible portraits. Van Dyke was so taken with her that he wrote in his notes, this is a sketch he made of Sophonisba, and his biographer mentions that he said, allegedly, that he had learned in those conversations, and this is very much a drawing during the conversations, you could see Sophonisba responding, that he had learned from Sophonisba more than any other famous male painter in his entire life, and that he will carry her advice, that it's so important to him. And he noted in his margins that it was amazing to him that though her eyesight had gone, her hands did not tremble and her mind was not clouded. And with that, we see Sophonisba on her deathbed. Van Dyck was so taken by her that he has actually painted her on her deathbed. And here she looks both dead and alive. There's such a presence to her in her passing to the other world. And I wanted to end her segment with a quote. This quote was actually in reference to a woman who was inspired by Sophonisba's example. And surely you would know of a great Italian painter, Tintoretto. His daughter decided, like Sophonisba, to follow in her footsteps. She even dressed up as a man in order to sneak out of the house and go see great paintings in the city. And it was said about her, but could have been as well said about Sophonisba. She will serve in the future as a model of womanly virtue, making known to the world that gems, gold, and precious clothing are not the true female adornments, but rather those virtues that shine in the soul and remain eternal after life. I pause here for a moment to think about this beautiful quote. The true decoration, the true adornment of the woman are those virtues of soul, her virtuosity, her gift, her painterliness, right? Her gift of teaching that will shine after she's gone already. It will last, right? While the jewels might not last, this gift will last. And I wonder if there are any questions or comments before we meet our next subject.
Nope, I think you're good to go.
All right. Artemisia Gentileschi. So many of you may be already familiar with her. Her name has been reinvigorated by feminism and also her rediscovery in 20th century by an Italian scholar. And you could see her work in many museums around the world. But what I love is her first name, Artemisia, which literally means arte mi sia, let art be mine. And when we look at this self-portrait, this is a self-portrait in a private collection. Wouldn't you want to have this? This self-portrait, we get to meet her. This is one of her youngest self-portrait in existence. She's so full of confidence. And remember, like with Sophonisba, what was the first thing we learned about her? That she's literate. What is the first thing that we learn about Artemisia? Here, she creates a self-portrait. I wonder if you could recognize the object in her hand is a palm leaf. She paints herself as a martyr, as a saint. Who is a martyr or a saint? A martyr or a saint is someone who's not afraid to tell the truth, even if it might cost them their life. So this, along with the statement, let art be mine, is how we meet Artemisia. Artemisia later taught herself to write, and we'll learn about that, but she wrote to one of her collectors, "With me, your illustrious lordship will not lose, and you will find the spirit of Caesar in the soul of a woman." And this reminds me a little bit of Sophonisba. Remember when she writes back to Archbishop and says, "Too late, I'm going to marry because you don't get to, the church doesn't get to say, it's the heavens proclaim my marriage." So the spirit of the man and the soul of a woman, or spirit of the great commander, not even the man, right? And with that, I wanted to thank the J. Paul Getty Museum Center here in Los Angeles. I jokingly thank them for buying this painting for me for this tour. This is their latest acquisition. It's just about 10 minutes away from my house, and I can hopefully go see it very soon. It was bought a few days ago, and with great excitement, I introduce you to the latest sale of Artemisia's work, and the subject here is Lucretia. Jeff, I wonder if you wanted to say something about Lucretia or this subject.
Well, I know very little. I know there was a rape, a death, and a war. And that's it.
That's actually a great beginning of a joke. So yes, you absolutely you nailed it. It's not just about the rape of this woman, which is a big topic already, but it is more about what that might signal, how that's not okay, and how it can change the future. So Lucretia, who was a very devout wife of a nobleman, was raped by a son of a king at the time in Rome. And when she came to her father and her husband to announce this, while they were deciding what to do, she said, "I beg you to avenge my death." And she fell onto her knife and she killed herself to remain pure by this act and to signal something major to happen. And what she signaled, and you could see how Artemisia paints this bare skin, this unarmored woman, this unprotected skin, the softness with the steel of this cold knife that's about to penetrate her, right? Really, you just want to intervene, but a second, split second, we don't have time and it'll be too late. What happens is that it causes a huge uprise of the nobility against the Roman tyrant king and the end of the rule of the king and the beginning of the republic. So this woman becomes a symbol, a heroine of change, political change, a symbol that through her sacrifice, something good will come for the people. I just want to attract you to how amazing the see-through shawl is painted, how amazing the steel is painted, how her skin is breathing. And this subject looks in many of her historic works. And she does not just paint portraits. Artemisia is very famous for making large historical narrative paintings, which was considered the highest level of painting. In many of them, she inserts her self-portraits. And in some of them, we'll notice that there's somebody who kind of resembles her. And that would be one of her daughters who survived. She had 5 children, and only one daughter survived. And she trains her too as a painter, and often she's her model as well. I wanted to again close up on the detail of this knife, and I am always paranoid that somebody's going to ask me a question that I wouldn't know. So I reached out to the Getty curator who was in charge of this acquisition. I thank him here for sharing the details, but there is this one little detail on the knife. Do you see that little black mark?
Yes.
So this would be the mark of the maker of the silver knife, which is incredible that you would be painting this scene of a suicide and pay attention to this last moments. It's almost like your mind becomes extra aware what happens in that moment. And also that strange handle. Can you see that animal again? We've seen the strange animal in Sophonisba's mother's portrait. Here, Davide shared with me that it resembles a knife held in Metropolitan Museum collection, that Artemisia might have seen a similar Roman knife, and here she puts in this detail to make the scene more palpable, more real, right? Quite an incredible little thing. So I wanted to introduce first the quality of her work and then her biography, so that you would not be interested because of her biography in her, by the level of craftsmanship, by the beauty of her painting. And here we meet Artemisia's father. So we met Sophonisba's father. There is nothing, the two are completely different. His name is Orazio. Look at that face. If you had to describe him in 3 words, Jeff, what would you say?
Stern, exacting, discipline.
That's it. That is how the contemporaries, this is almost a direct quote, even though you haven't read it, you nailed it. What's really interesting that this is also a portrait based, this etching is based by a portrait of Anthony van Dyke, the same artist who traveled to paint Sophonisba at her deathbed. So here we cross over the century with the same artist, kind of witnessing these 2 women. Orazio had 3 sons and a daughter. The sons were younger and Artemisia was elderly. And at 12 years old, Artemisia loses her mother to childbirth. And she becomes basically a mother to those 3 sons. She raises her brothers. And Gentileschi, Orazio, he was in love with his wife. He loved her. He suffered. Must have been even more stern and more difficult to be around. He could not teach other students. Nobody could stand his temperament. But he decided to teach all of his children how to paint. And though he has 3 sons, by the age 16, it is clear that the only one who is talented is Artemisia. And by 16, she can paint like nobody else. I have to say, though, it was quite difficult for her to learn how to paint. The only way she could learn was by his example, by his workshop, which is he's by himself in it. She was not allowed outside the house. She was born in Rome, and in Rome, the woman was taught badly. Even if she came to the window and stood by the window to look out, she was taught as flirtatious and bad reputation. And how would you see great art? In Rome, as you travel today, you go to all the great churches. You go, you see the frescoes, you see the art is everywhere. You don't need a museum, but you need to be in the city, and she wasn't let out. So this is one of her, this is the earliest painting signed by Artemisia. And you could see that she learned to paint without seeing that much great art. Literally, by 18, she's one of the greatest painters of her time. And here is the subject. Uh, she comes back again and again. She um, preferred the subject of a female heroine. She wanted to see a woman as a subject, as one that is in charge of her own fate, if you will. And each time it will be a different solution. This is the subject of Susanna and the elders. And I know Jeff knows a bit about that and might tell us what's happening here.
Well, the elders approached Susanna and propositioned her on the condition that if she refused, they would expose her and create a lie that she had offered herself, thus disgracing her if they did not submit to her will. But she resisted and was eventually redeemed by another protagonist who entered to defend her honor.
Exactly. Beautifully said. Uh, so what's interesting, this was a subject beloved by male painters and male patrons. Why? Because the subject is a naked girl. And like the elders, they can kind of drool over the beauty of the naked girl, but it is allowed because they're just looking at a painting, right? So in a way, they were behaving like the elders in the painting, but with a condition which allows them to do that, right? With a proper setting of art. Artemisia looks at this subject not through the male gaze, but through the female gaze. And what does usually Susanna is shown bathing and kind of enjoying and almost showing herself off to these elders, almost selling herself. But what is Susanna doing here? She's screaming no. And when we look at her face, it's in disgust. She's not submitting to this. She's not enjoying this. She is saying clearly, go away and never over my dead body, right? So this is really, and we're seeing this painted by a teenager. She's about 17 years old when she painted this. And it's really hard to separate at this point Artemisia's biography from her art. We should not, of course, think that her biography is more interesting of her art or somehow defines it, but it's incredibly hard to separate it because we learn that when Artemisia was 17 years old, she was raped in her father's studio. Her father had a collaborator, Agostino Tassi, who was a very violent but talented artist. And um, it was very important to Orazio to collaborate with Tassi because Tassi had Roman papal commissions and introduced Orazio to really great patrons. And Tassi was a frequenter at the studio and notices Artemisia, notices her paint, figures out a day when Orazio is going to be out of the house, comes in, and she describes, because there was a big trial that we'll find out in just a moment. And in this trial, all the notes survive. And Artemisia describes that she was painting, and he took the palette and brushes out of her hand and threw them, and then threw her on the bed and assaulted her. And this is her. Again, we return to the self-portrait as a martyr, perhaps gives a slightly different view of this painting. And from the 400-page trial testimony that lasted months, we find her words. He threw me on the edge of the bed, lifting my clothes. He placed a hand with a handkerchief on my mouth to keep me from screaming. And so to this day, you kind of get goosebumps when you read this testimony. And it went on and on and on. and for many months. But how did we get to the trial? I should back up. After Tassi violates her, he tells her, if you keep quiet, if you don't tell anybody, I promise to marry her. And of course, if she says that she was raped, if she says that she was assaulted, she's basically her life is disintegrated. She will never be able to get married. She will never be able to amount to anything, and she's afraid of her father. So she believes that Tassi will marry her, and for months this continues. Tassi continues to take advantage of her. Finally, the father, somehow Orazio, finds out what happened, and Orazio is the one who decides that this is horrible and this must be taken to court. And I wanted to share this painting. So I keep saying that Orazio was a painter, but I wanted to show you what a beautiful painter he was, even though, in my opinion, his daughter really outgrew him and she became even better painter than him. But this is a portrait of a young woman as a sibyl. And Jeffrey, are you familiar with this term, sibyl?
I'm familiar with the term, but maybe you can describe it a little more for me.
So maybe some of you have heard of it as well. But Sibyl is basically an ancient word for a female prophet, a woman who's able to tell the future. And here you know this because the woman is holding a special scroll with future written upon it. And this woman is actually a portrait of his daughter. This is Artemisia in front of you as a Sibyl. And look at this amazing portrait. Isn't that beautiful?
It
Look at
is.
her eyes, her hair, her softness, her gaze. But here we come to a really brutal part. They weren't believing that Artemisia was telling the truth. And the only way that the judge, there was no uh, jury, there was only the judge who would decide this case. The only way that the judge decided he would know the truth if he would torture Artemisia. And if she tells the same story that she said, that she was raped, that she was violated, under extreme torture, then she's telling the truth. The torture device that they used were these horrible ropes that were twisted around her hands, and they were tightened and tightened to the point where the fingers can actually snap off. Imagine what that means to the artist to lose their fingers, to lose their hand. And interestingly, they choose not to torture Tassi. They choose to torture Artemisia, to tell the truth. She agrees to it voluntarily because she says, I'm telling the truth. And this torture device was actually named Sibyls. Sibyls after Sibyl, who is the prophetess who tells the truth. Very interesting that Orazio chooses to paint Artemisia in the role of a Sibyl, the truth teller. And as she's tortured, and this torture device is tightened, and Tassi, the man who violated, looks at her in the face, and everybody is witnessing, she screams, è vero, è vero, è vero, è vero, over and over. It is true, it is true, it is true. And it's like you could hear through time in this portrait the truth of the Sibyl coming forward to us. She was, after that, decided that she was telling the truth, and Tassi was sentenced to leave Rome, a sentence which he never carried out. So he stayed in her native city, and it was Artemisia after the trial. Even now, everybody knows that she's not guilty. Tassi is the criminal. She's forced to leave because now everybody's laughing. Everybody knows the story. She's quickly married off overnight in a secret ceremony in the church to a minor painter but very supportive man, who takes her away, and on she goes. And she goes to Florence, and she at one point returns to Rome. She will be in Venice. She will go as far as Naples. And instead of being like Lucretia, instead of falling on her sword, she takes the paintbrush. And it is her paintbrush, not a suicide, that now is a weapon with which she avenges herself. She becomes one of the most important painters at the time, male or female. Most important men of court are lining up, cardinals and kings, for her commissions. She establishes her own studio, and she's the first woman in Florence to ever been accepted to a painter's academy. And I share with you this magnificent portrait here. And the title is Self-Portrait as the Allegory of Painting. And it is both. It is a self-portrait and it is allegory of painting, and it is neither. It's a very complicated image. So here we recognize Sophonisba, or someone who looks very closely like her. And we'll come back to this idea in just a moment. And what is an allegory of painting? At the time in 17th century, artists and patrons equally loved showing allegory and symbols through art and communicating messages to each other. So here, painting was conceived as a woman, and we know that because there was a famous writer who created iconography, a book of iconography. His name was Cesare Ripa, and he writes a description of what painting should be look like, the allegory of painting. She should be represented as a beautiful woman, probably because pintura is a female word, right? Painting, with full black hair, disheveled. Look at how Artemisia paints it exactly. Twisted in various ways with arched eyebrows that show imaginative thought. The mouth covered with a cloth tied behind her ears. Do you see the mouth covered, Jeff?
No, I don't see the mouth.
No, that detail is not here. With a chain of gold at her throat, and you see here the chain of gold at her throat, from which hangs a mask and has written in front imitation, imitatio, because painting is what? Imitation of nature. So this is by Cesare Ripa, and we see everything painted here exactly by detail, even the mask on her chain, which is imitatio, the mask, the imitation of nature, with great detail, except she will not be gagged. Remember, through her trial, we find out that's what Tassi did to her. She was silenced. She will never be silenced again. A painter will be loud. A painter will be one that speaks, even if they don't have words, right? Even if they have just the image to communicate. And that's so important here. I also wanted to say that at this time, she's a little bit older, and this woman seems too young to be a self-portrait, and yet it resembles so critically. Out of her 5 children, only her daughter survived, the one who she trained how to paint, and it's possible that it is her daughter who isn't stepping in to pose, especially if you consider this twisted, amazing pose. How would you see this in the mirror? How would you see what you look like? Which makes it even more interesting because imitatio, imitation, daughter is your reflection, is a continuation of a painting tradition. So wonderful lineage here that we see. And as we come little by little towards the end of the tour, we see another subject. I mentioned to you that female protagonist is going to be the subject, one of the main subject of Artemisia's work. And I know, Jeff, that you love this painting.
I do. I think it's probably one of the best Baroque paintings created. It's just fantastic.
Can you tell us a little bit why you love it?
Well, if you think of the other Baroque masters like Caravaggio and Rembrandt, who we talked about at length, and their use of dramatic light, I think here it's quintessential. It's defined so superbly. The source of light and the drama that it creates and how it reflects the idea of vision and presence and place. It's more than just a theatrical device here. It becomes an allegory in itself for what's happening in the painting. It's really, really dramatic.
Now, as you guys know, I don't show my PowerPoints to Jeff because I want him to be fresh and surprised, just like you are. So you'll be rewarded, Jeff, by what you said. The next slide is the light. The subject is the light. You absolutely, as always, incredible intuition and observation. And that's the reason that this tour makes a pleasure to collaborate with you and to bounce these ideas back and forth. But what's so interesting, so many times, the next painting we're going to see by Artemisia was actually attributed to Caravaggio. And I should say, who is to blame here is Orazio. Orazio met Caravaggio. It changed how he painted. he became obsessed with Caravaggioesque lighting. He taught it to Artemisia, and Artemisia passes on this tradition, but she makes it her own. There's reasons why this painting could never be painted by Caravaggio. And the reason is exactly the light source. Caravaggio never included the light source in his paintings. It's always outside of his work. It is the subject, but not the object of his paintings. And here, Artemisia includes this candlelight, and by painting the candlelight, how it illuminates, and the warmth, and the burning of the hand, and the reaction of this woman, it's a whole different subject that would never be part of Caravaggio's work. So it is like Caravaggio, and yet it goes into a new direction, which you were intuiting, Jeff, so beautifully. The subject here, right? We have Judith and her maid servant, and we're about to discover. Some of you may already be familiar. Jeff, do you want to just really briefly tell us what happens with Judith?
Sure. I'm not sure of the conflict, but I know that it's, the Israelites are at war and are losing. And Judith is inspired to sneak into the camp of the enemy and seduces Holofernes and beheads him. That's a real simple simplification of what happens, of course. And then, of course, takes the head back. And you spoke about this much more eloquently than I, so I'll let you take over there. But here we're at the moment after she has decapitated him. The maidservant there is wrapping his head, and they're about to embark on their escape back into their own city.
So beautifully told, and it's a dramatic moment because the deed is done, but she does not know if she will survive, if she will be able to make it back to her camp. Now, the interesting part, the twist of the story, is that because the Jewish people are about to lose, they've been sieged and they're starving and they lost their strength. Judith, who actually was a widow, overheard the elders at the camp say that we are going to surrender. This is not possible. We're going to die anyway. And she decides to take the matter into her own hands and sneaks into the enemy's camp again, like Jeff had said, manages to seduce Holofernes and cut off his head, and then takes the she has to take the head back because this is an inspiration to say to the Jewish people, keep fighting. That enemy is slayed, and I, a woman, was able to do it. So you guys can do the rest of it, right? I did the hard part. So she becomes this great hero, not only for the story here and for the Jewish people, but I would say for Italians, for any country that has ever been at siege. For instance, Florence was once at siege by a very famous siege from Rome, and the people of Florence had lived a very similar story. So I'm sure this becomes a metaphor, a greater metaphor, and one that could be applied politically.
Yeah, it's almost like another David and Goliath type of tale, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so here's the version of what happens before the scene we just saw. And we have, this is an enormous painting, 77 inches by 62 inches, a very big, big scale in Uffizi in Florence. And this a must see in person. It glows. It's hard to look at. It's so graphic. And this is the one that was attributed to Caravaggio. But this is the same scene by Caravaggio, and something very different is happening here. I'd like for our viewers now to have a say. Take a close look and tell us what is different. What do you perceive in the woman artist versus the male artist? How is the story told differently? I'd love to hear from our beautiful audience right now.
It's so great to see these next to each other, isn't it? Because there is such a dramatic difference.
Right? You could take us away by one, maybe minor, save the juicy observations for our audience, but one little observation while we wait for comments.
Well, I will say one word: determination.
Determination. Anything coming in yet?
The women are deeply involved, and I'm assuming they're referring to Artemisia.
On the right.
Yeah, on the right. It's interesting observation. The cloak, there's a difference in the colors of the clothing in the men. It could be symbolic for sure.
Yes.
They're not in fear, but in action.
Yes.
100%, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
take a look at the ages of the characters. This
Mm-hmm.
is important.
Yeah,
On
both
the
women are involved
right.
in Artemisia's.
On the right, in Artemisia's, both women are involved. And who is her assistant? A younger maiden.
Mm-hmm.
On the left in Caravaggio, Judith does the deed with a kind of disgust, like I kind of have to, but I don't want to. And the evil crone, this wrinkled up, scary woman, is edging her on. Come on, bloodthirsty, right?
I've got
On
a
the
great
right,
quote here.
yeah,
Somebody has put it here. The male artist portrays the female as passive and troubled. Artemisia paints herself as a determined ass kicker. Unquote.
that's right. Now, I don't again want to flatten the story with biography, but
Right.
it is important to know that this painting is painted after uh, she had been assaulted, after Artemisia has been assaulted, and before the trial was carried out. So in a way, some people said this is almost Artemisia. You see the resembles. It's definitely a self-portrait in Judith, and it's a revenge that she's taking vengeance over this man, and the man actually looks like Tassi, like the painter who assaulted her. Again, not to flatten it, but it's interesting to add that level. Now, we look at the detail of Artemisia and we find out that you think Caravaggio is bloody. Hers is much more graphic. And what's amazing about this image is that Holofernes is actually aware of what's happening to him. He is still alive while this is happening, and his eyes are full of understanding. But the next thing that I wanted to attract your attention is slightly unexpected, and that is the way the blood is painted. And if we go this way, notice how it strangely and almost decoratively projects outward and splatters the hands of the women and the breasts and the clothing. And here, nothing is accidental. This is truly fascinating. Artemisia was so interesting that she had access to greatest thinkers and made great many male friends. And one of them was actually a relative of Michelangelo, and one of them was a great scientist of her century, Galileo Galilei. And Galileo corresponded with her on many occasions. There are letters back and forth. And we know of one of his great inventions, the parabolic law of projectiles. And here I'm going to ask Jeff briefly to explain what that means.
So don't be under any illusion that I have any expertise in math and geometry, but I do know a little bit about this. Here we go. So all the way back to Aristotle and through medieval period, it was thought that a projectile's direction would be completely straight, and then when it ran out of energy, it would simply fall straight down to the ground. So it was a line that was straight, horizontal, and then vertical. And during the time of the Renaissance, and specifically with Galileo, as you're saying here, there was an interest for a couple reasons. One, to represent life and nature more realistically, but also an interest in warfare and the projection or projectiles that were being shot at each other and being able to aim them more accurately, probably a bigger motivation there. Galileo did this study and proved that it didn't go straight and then drop when it ran out of steam, that it actually lost altitude and created this arc. And so it's really fascinating, as you said, that she had access to him, that there were conversations and an interest in his studies and how she applied them to her painting.
There was a brilliant man who understood what Jeff so eloquently shared with us. And he did a study and overlaid the tracings of Galileo's drawing to the blood projection in this painting, and they coincided. And so what's so interesting, if we go back to Caravaggio, look at how the blood is so theatrical. On the left, We see it almost shoots out like like when in a movie they just want to, they don't even hide that it's blood. They want to show you it's like a cloth, right? Pretending to be blood, like a cheap effect, like something that's just rolling out of his neck. But on the right, it shoots not down, it goes up and in that arc of parabola, right? So it's so fascinating that here we see not only a heroine a female heroine to save the man, but a woman, Artemisia, who understands and curious about science and how the nature and the law of nature works, even at this point in this gruesome moment. Now she,
Dexter would be proud.
huh?
Dexter would be proud. Are you familiar with who Dexter, the
Tell.
TV show?
Oh yes.
He's a blood splatter specialist who also is a serial killer.
I thought that was so interesting. If you go back to our Vermeer tour, Invisible Museum tour, and we learned about correspondence between Leeuwenhoek, a great scientist and lens maker, and Vermeer and how that affected his work. And here we see a woman who's corresponding with a great scientist and how that affects her work. And it's not just in this painting. There's other instances where she shows the law of gravity and levitation in some of her assumptions of the Virgin. We clearly see the connection to Galileo's treatise. Remember, she was illiterate and she did not have a great father like Sophonisba. She taught herself how to read and write when she left Rome after her assault. She did not fall apart. She did not let the rape define her. She rise like a phoenix out of the ashes and became so famous that medals, commemorative medals, this is from 1625. This is how famous she's already. That commemorative medals are made of her, collectible, that her looks, because of her self-portrait, she is known not just as a painter, but like Rembrandt, what she looks like, right? And another instance, when she was among great artists, I believe this is in a time where she goes back to Rome. Could have been also in Venice. But there is an artist, Leonard Bramer, who depicted a series of drawings of all the famous men in the circles of the time who were great painters. And they're all guys, and there's only one woman. So I don't know if you noticed, but on the right, that guy-looking person, at the top it says Artemisia. We're going to look at it a little bit closer. Here she is. And now you could read Artemisia Gentileschi, and she's dressed as a woman, but instead of a beer mug, she holds a candied apple. Because if you go back for a moment, you see the guys are with beer and we're with drinks, and that's what they like to do. She likes a candied apple, but she does have a mustache, which is really funny. So the artist wanted to show she's one of the guys. I mean, we know she was a beautiful woman, and many men were in love with her, and she did have a fabulous lover herself. Recently, letters were discovered, like this that we see on the right, beautiful in her handwriting. Many letters, essential red letters to her lover. So she was very feminine, but here she's portrayed with mustache as one of the musketeers, one of the guys. A curious note in this compilation of famous artists, her father is not included. So she, at this time, she outgrew her father's name. She is the great artist. She is the famous one. I hope you enjoyed this as much. It was really hard to find this reproduction. I went on all kinds of search to do this for you. On the left, just to prove to you again how famous she is, an artist, Pierre Dumonstier, travels to make a portrait, not just of Artemisia, but of her hand, and how she holds her tool. Look at that elegant. Imagine this hand painting that brutal scene of Holofernes and all that blood splattering. Um, she lived a very hard life, but nothing would stop her. She had 5 children. She continued painting through pregnancy, and she lost 4 of her children. And in one of the letters to her lover, she says, "You will never understand the sadness that I feel. You will never feel as sad as I do," when she lost her young son. And despite it all, she continued to paint, always working. And I wanted to, believe it or not, we're coming to the conclusion. Although I would love to keep going on and on, the stories just unravel. And I hope it inspires you to read the volumes, to visit the exhibition, to travel around the world, to come back next time. But I wanted to end, and of course, we would love to hear your comments before we wrap up and your questions. But as Artemisia writes to Antonio Ruffo, to his collector, she says, "A woman's name raises doubts until her work is seen." And this is such a beautiful quote, right? So she says, let the work do the talking. Don't listen to my name. Don't think about my gender. And the second quote, I will show your illustrious lordship what a woman can do. And with that, we end a story of two beautiful women, and I'd love to hear from our audience.
Fantastic, Zhenya, as always. Wonderful insights to these wonderful painters. Now, I think many people have heard of Artemisia, but to hear the full story and then of both of these women and their roles in art history is really, really wonderful. I'm looking here. Oh, here comes some comments to me. Just wonderful lecture, superb presentation. And lots of people commenting. It's so wonderful to see an honest portrayal of real women in these Old Testament stories, and to see the contrast, I think, between the Caravaggio and her work was so telling, right?
I see a comment that she was Artemisia, a tragic and heroic figure. And I think that's so true. And at the same time, she was able to, like you said, tragic and heroic, outgrew the tragedy and become a hero, like the protagonist of her so many of her work, right? A woman who she can be raped, she can be accused, she can be blackmailed. That will not stop her in life or death or painting.
No, she certainly overcame incredible odds, personal, professional, cultural. More
And
so, I think, her role is so different. And the two women are very different, right? They share many qualities, but their life experience, their class, their upbringing, well, there are many similarities and many, many differences too. So it isn't like there's a singular story for women artists, right? They're just as diverse and varied. They share, the commonalities of the struggles within, a male-dominated field, but how they navigated that to successful careers is very unique.
completely unique. That's why I wanted to put them as this bracket, even though each one of them could have been an individual tour. I felt that the contrast between them and the contrast between the techniques in their work, the subjects in the work, and yet equal brilliance. My God, if you go and nothing can do justice, but if you see them in real life, oh, you'll drop. The paintings are so, even in reproduction, even on the screen, they look breathtaking, but so much more in person.
Wonderful. Well, before I forget, and we, hopefully answer a couple more questions, I do need to announce the winner of the last episode's contest. Now, if you remember, we asked folks to post in the comments that time their favorite image of a romantic painting. And we were challenged to pick an individual winner. So there's a tie, folks. We have a tie for the winner of the Rembrandt watercolor sets. We have two winners. And are you ready? Drum roll, please. We have Jules Pizzo and Judith Bishop. Jules and Judith, congratulations. You're the winners of a Rembrandt watercolor set. We'll get in touch with you through the comments here. And just remember, for the competition for next time, or this next go around, we're not going to post it in the comments. You're going to post it on your own social media, so your own Facebook page. Make sure you tag us, Royal Talents NA, and then use the hashtag Invisible Museum. That way we'll be able to find it, and we'll look at those and choose a winner for that great bundle of all of the Rembrandt specialty papers. So congratulations, you guys.
And congratulations, two women, perfect for a two women tour.
And one named Judith.
Holofernes did not win. And I wanted to say that all of your comments and questions do not remain unanswered. I will go through for many days to come. I'll keep the comments and questions going. Even if you're watching this lecture later and recording, I revisit, I return, and I engage with your ideas. If you have suggestions, what you want a subject of a tour to be, send it to us. Questions. I love it. So I wanted to thank again, and I wanted to thank the Invisible Museum Invisible team, Anna and Kyle and everybody at the Royal Talents North
Absolutely.
America who make this possible and of the highest quality. And of course to Jeff, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Zhenya, it's always fantastic. Always learn something new and look forward to them. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Do we know
Two
what our
months from
subject is for
now,
the next one?
2 months from now, I believe, although I'm known to change my mind, that it's going to be a really interesting subject, one you've probably never heard of. And that is walking in art, the subject of walking in art. And you'll be amazed how significant it is. Think about that's probably our biggest achievement as a human species to be able to walk upright. And what does it mean to philosophy? What does it mean to imagery and to individual artists? The
I like
subject
that.
of
I'm
walking.
starting to imagine images. I think of Courbet right off the bat, but I can't wait to see what you choose for that. That's fantastic. Look forward to that. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. As always, it's our pleasure to have you here. And like Zhenya said, she will be following up, and I will do my best to follow up on any technical questions about materials as well. And with that, until next time on the Invisible Museum, thank you everyone for joining us.